All right, welcome everyone to our May segment of Trauma-Informed Care for Refugee and Migration Ministries of the United Church of Christ. This space, as always, is for education and reflection. It's a time that we spend together that's meant to gain insight and provide tools to engage our ministries fully and responsibly from within us to those that we serve rather than taking. Our time together today is purposely not for nuts and bolts. We won't be discussing the mechanics of how to organize the stuff around getting a family resettled in the United States. Instead, as always, this is an educational exercise in best practices of engagement for vulnerable populations that includes a guided meditation generally, or some way of internalizing what we are learning about so that it becomes about me, being more present in the world so that I can be present for the other. Although this session is being recorded, the recording will only focus on the speaker while the speaker is speaking. So if you have your microphone unmuted, it will flash to you and you will be recorded. So please make sure that your microphone is muted if you are not speaking. Now, let us enter into a space of intentionality, listening, and willingness to learn, grow, and become fully present with our ministries. I'm going to open up with a scripture reading from Deuteronomy 10, verses 17 through 21. For the Lord your God is a God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. Fear the Lord your God and serve him. Hold fast to him and take your oaths in his name. He is the one you praise. He is your God who performed for you those great and awesome wonders you saw with your own eyes. Your ancestors who went down into Egypt were 70 in all, and now the Lord your God has made you numerous as stars in the sky. So I'd like to provide you with a devotional on these verses from Deuteronomy in order to orient us into this space of reflection. So shortly before I transitioned into this position at the United Church of Christ National Ministries, and for those of you who are watching the recording later and don't know me, I'm Irene Melissa Son. I'm the Minister for Refugee and Migration Services with UCC National. But before this, I was living in Hawaii, where I was a local church pastor for a rural Hawaiian church. And I was working on this Hawaiian empowerment project with these local leaders. We were designing an event that was meant to highlight Hawaiian sovereignty. Many might not know this, but the Hawaiian Islands were forcibly overthrown by the US government in cooperation with us, the United Church of Christ. In the late 1800s, the United Church of Christ, which was then the Congregationalists, worked with the US government and other predominantly white powers to overthrow the Hawaiian monarchy, and unfortunately successfully did so, which created a long series of events that turned Hawaii into a technical state, although the folks that I was working with would argue that it was illegally annexed. I agree with them. Hawaii has been fighting for its autonomy to take back their land, their culture, and their power and their sovereignty ever since then. Now, if you have more questions about our church's involvement with that, first of all, we issued a formal apology and reparations to the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1993. And then this year, we passed a Synod resolution in support of Hawaiian independence. But of course, as we will learn today in our conversations around steps to understanding racial bias, it is a very complicated machine that the UCC has created in overthrowing the Hawaiian Islands, and the steps to unlearning the behaviors that created that are ongoing always. So if you would like to learn more about that situation as it was then or as it is now, feel free to reach out to me and I will provide you with resources that will explain the UCC's involvement with the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Anyway, my point is that this event was meant to highlight Hawaiian sovereignty, Hawaiian empowerment, so that it could begin conversations about Hawaii getting their land back and their culture back. I supported this enthusiastically, and I thought of myself as a very good ally there to help. Obviously, I'm white. I am not Hawaiian. So I found a grant that the church was offering, and I spoke up at that event planning meeting. And I said that I would be applying for this grant to fund the event in the amount of $20,000. Bing! I was so thrilled that I had something to offer this important gathering. However, the response I got was not as enthusiastic. Fights started among the leadership about whether or not to accept the money because they'd always done it independently and they knew what the UCC had done to Hawaii before. Maybe it wasn't the best choice of people to take money from. So after several days of discord, it became clear that the money was posing more of a risk than a blessing. I applied for that money anyway, because I still thought it was a great idea. But apparently the church, also which is also Hawaiian, is the Hawaiian branch of the UCC. Again, it's a complicated mechanism that I could tell you about some other time. But so the church, which was the Hawaiian branch of the UCC, they agreed with the Hawaiians and they declined to issue the award. It was really embarrassing for me. I realized that I had tried to leech this incredible event for my own pride. And I apologized to the Hawaiian leadership team. This moment became a huge lesson for me in being able to see things done differently as not necessarily worse. I wanted to impose my white, Western style of event organizing with money and sponsorship and flashy bling bling and all the nice shirts and stuff onto a Hawaiian event that was more about collaboration, connection. Ha'aha'a is what it's called, the breath of life. Our God, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes, she saw this Hawaiian-led, Hawaiian empowerment event as perfect in the way that it was unfolding, without any sort of white, privileged church money coming into it, without any sort of Western influence coming into it. And I was trying to take that away, and that wasn't God's wisdom. I pray to God that she opens my eyes to see as she does, with beauty and wonder in all of God's children, different twinkling stars in the sky, with gifts and sources of light that are different than mine, and that my eyes are open to see that as it is, instead of the way that I think it should be. Amen. So with that reflection, I would like to introduce to you Tanya Longino and Danny Thomas, who will be presenting on the steps to understanding racial bias when working with refugees. Danny is professionally trained in conflict management. My son's in here.
God bless you.
Yeah. I'm sorry. My son just walked in here with a fart gun. Hold on one second.
And friends at the Peace Center, we talk about being authentic as well as vulnerable. So thank you for that, Irene, and thank you to your son.
Of all the things that he walks in here with a toy fart gun, cool. Anyway, hey, Adam, can you take that somewhere else, please, sweetheart? No, because I asked you not to. You're going to do it anyway. Okay, so I'm really sorry, Danny and Tanya. I think while I get my son to redirect his energy right now, if you don't mind introducing yourselves, I totally apologize. I will.
We got this.
Okay, go ahead, Danny. Welcome.
And feel free to mute yourself. Oh, and friends, that's exactly it. Life is about the unexpected things that happen, and sometimes the conflicts that occur will be kind of laughable, but sometimes they're not so much. But we still have to navigate through all of them, and that's one of the things the Peace Center does. As Irene said, my name's Danny Thomas. I'm executive director of the Peace Center, and we're a nonprofit located in Bucks County in eastern Pennsylvania on the East Coast, about 30 miles kind of north and slightly east of Philadelphia. So we do conflict resolution in schools, in the community. We actually are the regional Bullying Prevention Resource Center as well. So we're used to kids with fart guns, you know, it reminds us that it's the fun things in life, you know, and the things that we as adults wish we could still get away with. So we applaud your son for providing space for us to also be authentic and to be vulnerable, because as we cover the topic this evening, we're going to invite us all to be self-reflective and to be our best authentic selves in the conversation and in the thought. And for those viewing later, we would ask you as well. So if you clicked on thinking that in this presentation, you're going to get everything you need and it's only about doing your job in understanding racial bias as far as immigration, go ahead and click off now, because we'd really like you to apply this in all aspects, not just in your job, but to incorporate this in your life. The other piece, if you think that in this hour you're going to walk away and you're going to be absolutely competent and have mastered this, okay, lean in close, because really this is a teaser, because Tanya and I have been doing this work pretty much a large part of our lifetimes, and we still find there are things that we are learning. So we'll talk a little bit about humility and competency later on, because I know that Irene has guided you guys through competency and humility earlier on. So friends, prepare to learn, prepare to be a little uncomfortable at times, prepare to grow, and hopefully you'll get something out of this, but truly don't expect that you'll get everything, because Tanya is absolutely wonderful, but I know that she can't get it all crammed in an hour. For the most part, I'm the Queen of England. I smile and wave, and I will chime in a little bit. So I'm handing it over to Tanya for now, who will introduce herself.
Thank you, Danny. And thank you, Irene, for the invitation to join you and all the participants who are joining us right now and those who will be joining us later while you watch us on video. My name is Tanya Longino. I joined Danny Thomas, our Executive Director at the Peace Center. As in my role, I work with our community programming for the Peace Center, policies, practices, people, and how they all intersect and work well together, and how we use a lens of equity and racism and inclusion, and looking at that, how we can work best together in safe spaces and through conversations and dialogues, and really sitting down with one another and learning about each other. And that's why Danny and I love conversations like tonight, like tonight's conversation, because it gives us an opportunity to open up space, safe space for dialogue and learning. So tonight we're going to start our evening like we do most of our workshops, and that is with our community agreement. Danny, if it's okay with you, we might start there. Is that okay?
It is fine, please. And we promise it won't be death by PowerPoint.
It will not. And I'm going to ask you to let me know when you can see my screen. A thumbs up will work.
We can see your screen, and you are not on the community agreement.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny. So all of our workshops and our trainings, we begin with an opportunity to create a space that's safe for everyone, psychologically safe for everyone to engage and participate. And we do that by creating what we like to call a community agreement. Others call it ground rules for gathering or social contract. And we pull from many different sources to land on what feels good in our discussion and what feels safe for all participants. And Brian Stevenson, author, lawyer, actor, is one that we pull from. And he put together the bullets that you see here, this community agreement. And he encourages us to do that very first one, and that is to name and get proximate to whatever it is you are gathered, whatever the reason you are gathered for. So tonight we're gathered to understand the steps to racial bias as we work with our refugees. Name the problem. Whenever we're in communication or conversation that has to do with race, racism, prejudice, even understanding differences, we ask that everyone be open to changing the stories, the narratives that you've been told, whether it be from your family members, your teachers, even your clergy. We ask that you open up your heart and your mind to learning new information. Whenever we're learning something new, we can expect to be uncomfortable because it may be in conflict with what we have learned in the past or what we thought we knew about a particular subject or even a particular group of people. We want you to stay committed and engaged. This is an opportunity for each of us to learn something new. Remember what Danny just said, this is a teaser. We won't solve all the problems in 1 hour or less than an hour. So we ask you to respect the process of learning. Respect another person's truth. You're going to hear new information, maybe even hear something from a friend or someone that your colleague that you work with. Respect their experience and their truth. It's quite possibly different from yours. If you hear something that is hurtful, harmful, you need clarity, we ask that you use those I statements. Let us know that. Let each other know, but speak only from your own experience. Be open to learning and use this as an opportunity to learn and to not debate. Listen respectfully and respect confidentiality. Tonight, you hopefully will walk away with a lot of pearls that you could share with friends and family and colleagues and clergy. We want you to do just that. Personal stories that you hear, we ask that you leave those in this space and respect one another's confidentiality. Remain hopeful. That's really important for the work that we do and the work that we do together. So
Okay.
Go ahead, Danny.
I just want to chime in especially since it is a group, faith-based group. At the Peace Center, I tell us that we are purveyors of hope and peace. So more so when we talk about people of faith, we're called to be purveyors, especially of hope and peace. So emphasis on the hope. So you guys can put that one at the top of your community agreements. Okay, sorry, back to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Danny. Danny and I, as he mentioned earlier, when the pandemic happened, we learned to pivot all of our work just about to a virtual platform. So we're very good about paying attention to Zoom hands and all the features of Zoom. We're an intimate space tonight. So if you want to raise your actual hand, please feel free to do that. Drop notes in the chat for us. We pay attention to those and we want to make sure that we are engaging. We're engaging with you. So if you put something in the chat, we'll make sure to call on or address your comment. So feel free to do that too. Anything I left out, Danny?
Nope, all good.
All right. Danny mentioned objectives for tonight. Uh-oh. Danny told me that I could drive the PowerPoint and I'll just quit playing and toggling with the mouse because it moves the slides when I do that. So tonight we have a couple of objectives, and that is to be self-reflective in this work as we talk about understanding the steps to racial bias. And you've already done some work on cultural humility, and that is a call for self-reflection. So we'll touch on that a bit and how all of this work intersects with racism and immigration. We'll touch on that as well. Danny?
We have a colleague who she uses the quote from Anais Nin, and I always question because it's like, I know the book you got it from. We see people as we are, not as they are.
Mm-hmm.
So self-reflection is really important in most of our jobs. So as we go into our next slide, please, Tanya, I pulled this statement from your website, from your Racial Justice Ministries. And at the Peace Center, we talk about racism in the US being the ism that is the bookends for all of the other isms. You know, pretty much all of the negative isms fit within those bookends. And your statement, and I need to move things here. The United Church of Christ acknowledges and supports the equality of all humans. And, okay, Tanya, leave your mouse alone.
Sorry. Hands up here.
There we go. You know, and I really applaud this public statement. It is very bold. Mm-hmm. And it's very courageous. And you are right. You're one of the very few Christian churches that's publicly making this statement. And I was particularly intrigued by engaging in direct social activism, participating in civil disobedience as a way to bring attention to and disrupt racist systems and structures. The reality of racism, white supremacy, and nationalism threatens God's sacred human family. As people of faith, we remain vigilant anti-racist advocates and activists, responding to threats and acts of violence towards our sisters and brothers, our siblings of African, Asian, Latin, and Native descent, whose civil and human rights are violated on a daily basis. You know, and we could open that up to other siblings, mm-hmm. Populations. So in that last paragraph, it sounds as a community of faith, you are already all activists and advocates. So I'm going to ask us, and Irene, if we could throw up that first poll question, please, because we're going to.
So the problem with the poll is that it's either all or nothing. Do you want me to go ahead and launch the poll?
Launch the poll. So we're just going to ask everyone to answer the first question on the poll, please. And do you feel that that statement from the Racial Justice Ministries is an accurate statement, but more importantly, well, yeah, do you feel it's a true and accurate statement when you think about your role in the church? Yes, no, or unsure. So just take a minute to reflect and then answer.
Okay, because we're only answering the first question, I'm going to go ahead and end
poll. Thank you. Results. All righty then.
So Danny, and I'm going to ask this question of Linda and Marty and even Irene. Is it better? Would it be better to add your answer to the chat?
Yeah, I think that would work better. Or since we're a small live group, you know, if folks just want to say out loud any thoughts, this is an open space for reflection, or the chat.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Close it, Irene, on my end. That way we can. So if anyone wants to add in the chat your thoughts about Danny's question.
Okay.
Were you aware of the statement?
Okay, so we've got.
Do you have any responses, Danny?
We do. We have one who was aware of the statement and someone who does feel that it's true in their role. Okay, and that's really good because when we talk about being activists and allies, we'll see that those are key steps in understanding racial bias. But there is some groundwork often that needs to be done. So Tanya, do you mind sharing the next slide? So if you're called to be activists and allies, we ask, okay, what are we supposed to do? What do you do with that? So we have this little tool that we use. We actually turned it into a postcard so we could give it out to folks to carry around and keep it in their notebooks just for reminders. And you'll see that activist, ally are at the top of the stairs. And most of us put ourselves there. And your denomination actually has automatically put you there. So I just wanted us to have a little moment of reflection on that. Do we feel that we're always equipped to be there? Has that your denomination put you there? Are you comfortable in that space? You can unmute and chat and comment. Thank you, Tanya.
You know, we've actually had this conversation at UCC National when we do national trainings. We have conversations about that statement that you brought up and whether or not we actually, right, it's a dynamic situation, exactly, about if we actually live into that. And I think for me personally, that situation in Hawaii that I just brought up is you know, one of the ways in which saying I am an ally does not line up with the ways that we actually act. And so I appreciate that you guys bring these steps in to say that we're not always on the same step, and sometimes it's needed to take a step back to learn more about the place that I'm coming from, my motivation, and my privilege. And I see Ron's on here. I know Ron has a lot of wisdom on this too. Thanks for coming, Ron, in case you have anything you want to add.
And thank you for that, Irene. Marty, your statement, not sure each of us always stay on the same step. That's something that we talk about all the time, even as practitioners of social justice and racial equity work. We find ourselves, Danny, don't we, on any given day or
moment.
That's true, or in any given moment, I can be right back in the basement with my level of understanding. And because you hit the nail on the head when you said it's a dynamic, it is dynamic and it's always evolving, this work. But that's the willingness to understand and be aware. That's the reflection piece that we talk about, or part of it, that I understand that, you know what, I don't know what I don't know. And that's okay if I'm willing to do the work and engage in the process that we talked about really early on. And recognizing that is part of me getting to step 6. Any other thoughts? I saw someone else, another comment. Linda. I find there's always more understanding that I need to uncover. Absolutely. Absolutely. Linda or Marty, did you want to share more?
Yeah, I can say more. I think that particularly as we've worked on our refugee resettling here, many of us have uncovered many things that we did not know about the systems and how they work in our
Mhm.
community. Even though we thought we were well connected, that we had good networks, that we had a grasp of this community and how healthcare, transportation, education, social services, food banks, all this work. We really didn't. We keep bumping in to more awareness all the time. So it's a learning process for us, seriously, every day as we walk with our family.
Indeed. And that's also,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Irene.
No, no, no.
Smarty.
I was just basically, trying to agree and think about, like, over the different months, and now we're into years of accompanying immigrants through their legal processes and living here, just trying to establish themselves. Different challenges open up whole new lenses for us. So it's exactly what Linda was just saying, and it's just an ongoing kind of journey and learning experience. Yeah,
Agree.
let's do it.
I'm pulling in from a slide that's way at the end, so we'll skip it when we get there. I appreciate you all recognizing and having the humility
Mhm.
to say, okay, it's a dynamic and we're recognizing the things we don't know. And that really is key in the self-reflection piece, is having the humility to go back to learn instead of powering your way through it. So Irene, thank you for that story very early on, sharing about the need to be, the vulnerability of being humble and to listen to the spirit moving sometimes against what we want and us going in the direction, a different direction, because we find ourselves, I'm pretty much always in the basement at some aspect a couple times during the day because you don't know what you don't know. So I appreciate, as we were preparing to work with you all, the courage that your church is taking across the board to go back and be humble and to go back and partner. So to truly begin working on these steps instead of continuing the colonial power dynamic under the guise of let's be humble and say, okay, we're all siblings. So thank you for that bit. Okay, sorry, Tanya.
That's okay. I was wondering if we quickly, because we're a small enough group, as you're reflecting on the steps, can you think about, and just for maybe 30 seconds, think about where you were on the steps 10 years ago, and then think about where you are on the steps today.
And I'm going to challenge you even more
Okay.
personally, as well as your denomination, if you've been part of UCC for that long, because I know you're 5 years into your 10-year strategic vision plan. So, okay, take a deep breath on that one.
And if anyone is willing to share where they might place themselves today versus where they were 10 years ago.
I'm, you know, I'm a lay leader in my church. I'm not a pastor. Um, my background studies were international relations, so I did a great deal of global work
Mhm.
in my profession. You know, all through my studies and then in my profession, a lot of global work. Um, so I have been a person who's lived in another country and been amidst different cultures and amidst different ethnic situations and cultural practices that where I felt like I just needed to be very like open and humble in that environment at all times. And by the time I moved back to the United States, I've really recognized that we have so many assumptions that we just expect people to know how things are done here and just be okay with it. And I remember growing up when people would even just, you know, very bluntly just say, look, if you're coming to our country, you need to learn English, you know, things like that. And so when I moved back to the United States, it just brought a whole different kind of shift in me with me. Um, but I think that starting this immigrant accompaniment ministry that we've been in now for the past 4 years has really, really fine-tuned that for a lot of us that have been involved in it. And I was very fortunate to be invited to a delegation that actually went to the home country of the immigrants that we're working with and supporting, and going to their country and living in their communities for a few weeks. That was just such a different way to become aware and understanding of sort of what what their lived experience has been like, and the type of community and resources and engagements that they've been learning about and living with for their entire lives until they moved to the United States. So, I mean, I just think the shift is continuous and it's huge. There's just no way to really compare, you know, where I started with where I am now. Not that this is the end of the journey by any means. It's just a very big change.
Thank you. Thank you, Marty, for sharing that. Anyone else?
I'd have to honestly say, I don't think that 10 years ago, I knew about these steps. I think our conversations here in the last probably 6 years, 5 years, have really started to delineate these for us. I don't think it was a conversation much before then, even though we understood there is racism.
Mm-hmm.
But this over the last 5-6 years has become much more refined and defined and descript, you know, many more books, discussions, study groups, etc. about it.
And Linda, you're right. I think I'll agree with you for sure that we do a much better job today of being a little bit more intentional around each individual step in understanding where we are, because I would say maybe even less than 5 years ago, we were still doing performative work in terms of just writing a check. And money is good. We take the money. Money's always good. But that's not all we need to do, because those systems, and my memory's bad when asking you to go back 10 years, I can't even go back within the last 15 minutes of who said or talked about the systems that hold a lot of our practices still in place, and understanding what those systems are, first of all, and how they intersect with the work that we do in our churches, in our houses of faith. So thank you, Linda, for sharing that. Danny, I'm gonna move us to
Yes, good. And while you're moving to us to that, it actually goes right back to what Marty had said earlier. We are on different steps.
Mhm.
Not everyone's on the same step at the same time. So whereas some people were aware 10 years ago that things were happening, others may not have been.
Mhm.
And that is a perfect segue into the section on blind spots,
Mhm.
because we may find that we don't know what we don't know, or we might be living in the midst of it, but not seeing it. In my other life, if I went out with my clergy colleagues, um, one particular situation I highlighted to them, I said, I would like you to observe how we are treated when we go out to lunch. And, I watched it for a few times and it was a repeated behavior. And I said, I would like you to pay attention. And it wasn't until I called their attention to it that they were able to see that there was a slight discrepancy in the treatment of me as the pastor of color, the person of color in the group, compared to my colleagues who were Anglo. So, you know, we we don't expect it, but sometimes we just innocently will say things.
Mhm.
And as Marty was talking about living in another country, and how in this country we talk about it's important to speak English. Sometimes we'll just say things because they just happen to be part of our culture. And I always put this first one there because it was over 10 years ago. We were doing a workshop. I was on our denomination's Commission on Religion and Race, and we were actually doing a workshop with Robin DiAngelo before she had done White Fragility. And we were in breakout groups, and I stand in the middle of the room, and I said, okay, everyone, come back together. Let's circle the wagons. And my friend Cynthia looks at me and goes, Danny, really? And it took me a moment. And then I actually had to see Cynthia. Cynthia is Lenape.
Mhm.
So she's a Native American, indigenous folks from the kind of Delaware Valley region. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. But, it was so part of our regular vernacular 10 years ago, 12 years ago. So there are things that we may say that we don't know the impact that they may have on other people because they're bias statements, but we don't mean them. We don't intend them as bias. So I put myself back in the basement that day. Okay, church folks, do you ever say, okay, we all have our cross to bear?
I've said it many times.
Many times.
Mhm.
Yeah. Do we say that to our Jewish or Muslim brothers and sisters? We all have our cross to bear?
Mhm. Mm.
Yeah. My Jewish coworker was like, well, no, not really. This is one of Tanya's favorites.
Putting on our big boy pants. I shared with Danny that part of my background, not a part of it, it's probably the majority of my work has been in human resources. And that that statement is probably one of my, nails on the chalkboard kind of statements. Put on your big boy pants, and girls put on your, undergarments, and it's not said so nicely. And that is one of those statements that we have heard or said, um, and it's inappropriate. It's inappropriate, and we do it without thinking. And that's when we talk about where our biases come from. Where do they come from, by the way? And you could just drop something in the chat, because all of us have them. And They come from a variety of places. And I'm going to look here in the chat to see if anyone has shared. They come from our, like I said earlier, our teachers, our parents. I say I can hear my mother and my father's voice when I make a statement now as an adult, a professional adult, that I know, ooh, I shouldn't have said that. And I'm always calling myself and becoming more aware of even the places and spaces where I need to reckon with and do a better job in terms of what I'm thinking, and then how certainly what I'm sharing and my actions as a result of it. And that's what's really important in terms of understanding and recognizing our own biases. Where do they come from? You can drop that in the chat. Even as kids, Marty says, our families, as kids, our friends, how we choose friends as we get old enough to choose what media we consume. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just so, yes, we all have biases, and not all biases are necessarily always bad. Biases become bad when we put our negative biases towards people with power to impact their lives or livelihood,
Mhm.
or when we use them as stereotypes. For example, I use this line because I actually live in Trenton, New Jersey, and the folks nearby, when I say that, they tend to turn up their nose because that's kind of a bias. Because Trenton is kind of in urban decline. We're in that coming up. But, it's like my line is, if I see a group of young Black kids standing on the street corner at 10 at night, I'm going to cross the street. The reality is, if I see a group of white kids standing on the street corner at 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to cross the street because I'm a 60-something-year-old Black man that probably can't outrun them all. So it's self-protection and concern. I'm not going to immediately call the cops and say there are kids on the corner, because they have a right to be there. But we also have the right to protect ourselves. We do a program at the Peace Center around a film where we bridge law enforcement officers with community members. And we talk about what's suspicious behavior and what activities, and how to get beyond bias into the actions. So judge people by character and action, not by appearance or your own anticipation of what they will do or who they will be. Okay, Tanya, do you want this one or shall I?
Go ahead, Danny.
Okay, this one was also taken from your site. This is your identity. And we felt it very important because as you are opening your doors to immigrants, also making sure you look around at the people that you already have inside, in all the wonderful hues, that they are also being heard. Because one of the things that at the Peace Center we often have to deal with is navigating that space that as new groups come in, we don't necessarily figure out how to integrate new groups coming in with groups who are always there. And especially when we do our anti-racism work, what we find, especially in dealing with the African-American population in the US, is every other group that comes in gets elevated above African American group. So African American is just, it's a space in the US. So helping everyone navigate that space equitably, I think will be key for pretty much everyone. So the part that I liked about this was dynamic need to be nimble and changing. So when you talk about united and uniting, it's a state of being as well as becoming. So you're clearly stressing that you are willing to move away from who you were into who you can become. So when we talk about remaining hopeful, you're casting this large hopeful vision. So as you are looking at the steps for racial bias, what you're doing is you're also looking at a time when you won't necessarily need to navigate racial bias, because you will have built systems that those biases don't exist. And recognizing that your immigrant populations, your folks coming in, face similar situations as the people who are already here. Because as we said, those bookends of racism. Okay, let's quickly go beyond this so we can get to our poll questions, because those are kind of our meditation moments here. Oh, okay, just remembering racial bias, understanding racial bias and cultivating cultural humility do go hand in hand. We have to remember our own place. We don't know what we don't know, and the humility to go back. Okay, and this is from your creed, and I chose the Robert Moss version because he used inclusive language as opposed to God, he. But the promises, God promises in the gospel for all people, you know, forgiveness of sins and fullness of grace. And key to this, courage in the struggle for justice and peace. And then that you will find and you will offer presence of the Holy Spirit in your own trials, and you will offer it to others in trial, as well as when you are rejoicing. And after all this, eternal life in the kingdom which has no end, that you are help building now. Okay, thanks, Tanya.
So, and we'll go through these questions pretty quickly, especially as we reflect back on the visual that was of the church and embody all of the different people that God calls to our church. And you think about the nimbleness of our practices and the construct of those practices that we put together. How often do you find yourself negotiating between what's considered essential and non-essential elements of the church? And who decides what is essential? You can drop that in the chat. Just think about that for a moment. And I'm going to scroll us through the other questions because it might be an opportunity just to kind of think about these questions. Many of us who join are leaders within our church, and leaders most often inherently hold power. How easily Are you willing to share your power, authentically share your power? Do you? Do you ever think about it, or do you relinquish it or share it begrudgingly? And I think go ahead, Danny.
No, this is just my favorite.
Yep.
The humility to start in the basement each day.
Have you had to be courageous in front of your other colleagues you perceive to hold more power than you? And Danny?
Okay, and closing out, I like this quote because Kwame Nkrumah was considered one of the leaders for Pan-Africanism in the 40s, with kind of breaking the colonial cycle and helping African nations become independent nations. We face neither east nor west, we face forward. And as a church, you are called to face forward and help others face forward. And in your role, working with helping folks resettle, you have to help them face forward while remembering their past, honoring their journey, and helping them develop a new way forward. Okay, that's it for the presentation. I'm going to give it back to Irene, and we are 30 seconds over. Sorry.
Thank you, Danny and Tanya. That was a really powerful presentation. I know for me personally, I'm reflecting on all the times working with refugees and migrants in which I wish that I had done a reflection every morning that asked me to be in the basement, to be willing to give space for what will be rather than what I wanted to happen. I hope that the takeaway for our audience will be that willingness to be in the basement and to self-reflect and understand oneself and our power and privilege as a predominantly white church that's committed to racial justice and welcoming the immigrant. So we are out of time today, but if you would like to follow up with any questions, again, this is the Peace Center in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. Or you could send an email to me and I can pass the message along. And next month, we are not going to be having a trauma-informed care meeting because next month is World Refugee Sunday month. So instead, all of our ecumenical partners getting together in order to celebrate World Refugee Day. And so we invite you into that space next month. And we will be back to doing our trauma-informed care again in July. So thank you again, Danny and Tanya, for your time, your wisdom, and for opening us up to be a better, stronger church together. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in July.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, peace to you. My standard benediction, go in peace to love God and serve the world.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.